PR Connections Radio presents. This podcast is brought to you by LifeWave. Ready to elevate your wellness game? Meet X39 from LifeWave.com. This game-changing patch uses phototherapy to stimulate your skin, enhancing strength and stamina by channeling your body's innate energy. Simply apply it to harness infrared heat, naturally boosting your vitality. Want to learn more? Visit www.lifewave.com/VernD and step into a healthier, more active lifestyle today.
Welcome to Breaking the Silence, Finding the Courage to be Heard, where we turn quiet fears into confident voices. Now, do you ever notice how some folks use their voices to grab all of the spotlight? Some voices don't need to compete for attention. They create impact through presence, consistency, and lived experiences. So today's guest brings that kind of voice. She has spent years leading in the educational space, guiding conversations, building relationships, and influencing outcomes, not by being the loudest voice in the room, but by being intentional with the one that she has. So joining me today is Sonya. I am so excited to have you here. And tell us just a little bit about yourself so our listeners can get to know you.
Hi, Gail. Thanks for having me. As you mentioned, my name is Sonya. I currently work in sales in the educational space, but I've always worked in education. I was a teacher. I worked in a college as an enrollment advisor in the College of Education, and now I'm in curriculum sales, and I am a mom of 9 kids.
Woo! That's amazing. That's exciting as well. And you mentioned about being in education this entire time, and this is something that you and I both have in common, because you've led in classrooms and business and then within your own family. Now, when people equate being heard with being loud, what do you think they're missing, especially from your perspective across all those different roles? Are there any examples that stand out that you could share with us today?
Sure. So I'm going to be completely honest. Loudness is a tool, right? It is an actual tool. And I kind of have an unfair advantage because I was a high school cheerleader. And okay, so you understand how important voice is. And that was by far my best cheerleading skill, was my voice. I was loud and I could get everyone going. So I could get loud and I could get there fast. And I've used it, I've used that in my home at times. There's times you pull out the cheerleader voice, and it kind of sends a shock through everyone's system and makes everyone freeze in their tracks. But the thing is, that is very temporary. It only works for a little while. And what I've learned across classrooms and in business and in my home is that while volume might get that immediate attention, it's your presence that really is what lasts and what makes people stay with you. So in the classroom, we've all had this experience, whether we were a teacher or you remember when you were a child in school or you were a parent, you walk down a school hallway and you hear this teacher just yelling at the top of her lungs. And I can almost bet you that she has lost all control of her class at that point. So those teachers that were in the most control were often the ones that were not the loudest. They were the ones that could pause. They could shift the energy and the room would follow. And in business, I've seen the same kind of things. The loudest person in the meeting is not the one that you remember. It's the person who is intentional when they speak, who speaks with clarity at the right time, and who allows you to kind of see that problem or issue you're dealing with differently. At home, that's where you can really feel the difference, because you can't lead a family with volume, even though you might get that immediate response. Over time, it's the consistency. It's how you ground yourself. It's how you align yourself and how you show up that actually shapes your children's behavior. So I think what people miss about that being heard isn't about how loud you are, it is about how grounded you are. And that volume might be able to grab attention, but presence is what keeps people right there with you.
Absolutely. And, having been in many classrooms, many grade levels, sometimes it doesn't necessarily focus on the fact that you know what it means to be patient and present and not necessarily loud. If your students come from an environment where loud is the only way that their attention can be gotten,
Yeah.
then they come into your classroom and they create that kind of chaos.
True.
So, because that's what they're used to.
True.
And so I think about, everything that you've said about making sure that, you don't use that loudness as a tool, doesn't get overlooked by the people that you're interacting with, because
Right.
that's often what can happen. So, and I think you might have talked about this one in your last response, whether teaching or leading your clients or raising your family. How do you perceive the difference between being loud and being truly present when you speak?
Sure. So for me, the difference is how people feel after they interact with you, and then what actions they take on after that interaction, right? So I've experienced, as someone in the workforce, I've experienced both ends of the spectrum. I had an extremely effective leader, and it was you, Gail. Gail, you were maybe the most effective leader I've ever had.
Thank you.
And what stood out is that you did not lead with volume. In fact, I don't know if I ever heard you yell in a team meeting or at me. You met with us as a team often. You also met with us individually. You were always available. You asked questions, you brainstormed, you helped us work through challenges. And when there was a problem that needed to be dealt with, we looked for a root. We looked for what was causing that problem, not to point fingers. And when there was a win, you made sure it was seen and celebrated. And that is maybe the best thing you could do. It makes people want to bring good work to you. It really is what promotes good, hard work. And it's just steady. And then I've had the other side of it.
Yes,
I've had leadership that isn't readily available, that cancels meetings, that's not there for me. And then when that leader does show up, it's loud, it's scary. And what happens in those cases is oftentimes what you're doing is no longer worrying about your work and bringing good work. You're worried about, I don't want to do the wrong thing. I want to fly under the radar. And it doesn't promote good work. It makes it hard. And that's really the difference. So loud leadership might get compliance in the moment, but presence and calm and steady leadership is really what, drives performance, growth, creativity, and all of those things. And I've caught myself slipping into that louder way at home at times. And what I often find is that while I'll get that good behavior right away, that usually what happens is then I need to go back and repair something that's happened as a result of that. So I think being truly present means you're engaged, consistent, you're intentional, and people know where they stand with you. And because of that, they don't just respond to you, they want to work well for you and for themselves.
Absolutely. And when you brought back to mind the work environment that you and I were both involved in, and thank you for all of those kind words about.
Of course, it's the truth. It's the truth.
Our team dynamic and me as a leader, and those are the really positive things that I remember.
Yep.
And I also remember times when our whole team was interacting with like everybody in the company.
Mm-hmm.
There were different people within the companies that were leading meetings and so forth. And sometimes those meetings would get intense. But one thing that I could always count on is that, members like you from my team and others from the team would bring a calmness to the conversation. Like if something was going on, could either step up and say, well, let's take a step back and let's think about this. So that really made me proud and happy to lead a team that took that calmness and presence and steadiness that we had within our own team and can bring it out, to the rest of the world in order to make an impact. And so that was
well, I think that in saying that, not to continue to pile on the compliments, but part of that was because you created a safe space. We knew that you were then we could come back, there would be conversations, you would be able to give us some feedback, and that you would, if there was a need to go to war, you were going to do that for us. So we knew that, and that was why we were able to do that.
Yep. So I remember that with fondness, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So moving on to a little bit more about your family and career. Having raised quite a few children and influenced so many people professionally, do you have any other examples, maybe from your family or career, where someone had a powerful impact without being loud?
Sure. Yeah. So it's interesting you mentioned that I've raised all these children, and I have, and it's been, my greatest accomplishment, the thing I'm most proud of. But who I am is really, where I came from. And my dad had a extremely remarkable story. He was the youngest boy born in a family of 7 children in deep Georgia. And they were very poor. And his mother was loving and doting. And when he talks about his mother, it's only with fondness. But when he talks about his father, it's a different story. He was difficult. He was hard. He was an alcoholic. And it made his life really a challenge. And so when my dad was in middle school, he had to drop out of school and he had to start working full time to start contributing to the family. And in all honesty, he had to do it so he could pay for some dental work he needed. He needed to take care of himself and to help take care of his family. When he was a teenager, he joined the Navy, and he became an explosive specialist, became a Navy SEAL. He did several tours in Vietnam, and eventually he retired as an officer and then went on to a completely different successful career. So by every definition, he was strong. He was a strong man. But what made the biggest impact on me wasn't his toughness, but it was actually his kindness. He was quiet and thoughtful, and maybe the most thoughtful and quiet man that I've ever known in my life. And he didn't yell unless he was in the bleachers cheering us on, and then he was loud. Other than that, he wasn't. So one moment that stays with me happened when I was 17. I got a speeding ticket, as 17-year-olds sometimes do. And in my teenage logic, I just hid it. I just hid the ticket and assumed that it would go away. I'm just going to ignore it. Court date passed, just ignoring it. Well, one day my dad shows up to school and takes me to lunch, and we go and have this great lunch. But sometime between conversations, he lets me know, I found this ticket of yours. So he doesn't yell, but immediately I know there's going to be, we're fixing this. We're on the road to fixing this. And we got in the car and we drove straight to the courthouse after lunch, and we sat there for hours. And I don't even know if you can do that anymore, but in 1990 you could. And we sat in a suburb in Phoenix, you could. So we sat in the courthouse and waited for the judge to see us. And we went in, and my dad sat down and made it very clear that I was going to be the one speaking and not him. And I stood there and I explained the whole thing. And the judge was kind, but I got quite a fine slapped on me at that time. And my dad went in and paid that fine. And we got in the car, and my dad made it very clear that was not the end. But there was going to be some fixing on my end to do, but he was very calm about it. He created a very long list of things that I was going to be responsible for. And and I wasn't going to have any fun in life until these things were done. And these were not the normal things that you would do. Like I was cleaning fireplaces and I was, polishing silver. And I couldn't even tell you when my mom had polished silver before then. It was just a job. And I was washing everyone's cars inside and out. And this list went on and on and on, and it took weeks. And my dad was consistent. He checked everything and he double checked everything. And if it wasn't done right, I had to do it again. And I'll be honest, there were moments that I was a complete brat. I remember.
Of course.
But he never lost his calm. He stayed clear. He stayed firm. And the thing that sticks with me the most of all that was when I did something well, when I polished that silver right, he acknowledged it. He gave me the kudos for it. So even in the middle of the consequences, there were wins. I was feeling confident. I was getting something from it. And he made sure that I saw it when there was a win. And when I finally finished, he told me, "You've done your time and I'm incredibly proud of you." And that was quiet influence. And that made a huge impact on my life.
Wow. And that is such a valuable lesson for me to hear, for all of our listeners to hear as well. And the fact that you brought up your father as this particular example also solidifies the fact that this loudness versus steady presence is generational.
Yeah.
So thinking about that and the way your children perceive you, how do you think that, or do you see that influence? Not how, but do you see that influence maybe in the way your kids are raising their kids, your grandkids?
I for sure do. Yeah. I think that there are moments when my kids will repeat a phrase that I've used, or you see them using the same kind of loving language and quietness and taking a step back before. And I think that's me.
Yep.
There's nothing more proud. There's nothing to be more proud of than that in that moment. It really is. It's an amazing thing. So for sure. Absolutely. I love that. How about you?
Well, yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked the question, because when you said there's that phrase, I think back that my mother, who was mostly the calming influence, if something horrendous happened that we did, that we were responsible for, she was like, "You wait till your father gets home."
Yep. Yep.
That was, and that was the sheer terror, because you knew that, he was actually the person that would get loud and he would get forceful. But she was the calm one. She says, "All right, you made your bed, you're going to lie in it, but you're going to lie in it when he gets home." So
I know. I think that's how in my household, it was the opposite. My mom was fiery, and she'd get after you on things. And my dad was just that calming influence. And both of them, there's value in both of those things.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
My concern these days is that my kids have focused a lot on what the social media says, what the internet says.
Yeah.
And so things that we know works because it's worked for generation. They're sometimes saying and doing things based upon what they believe to be research based. And the only research is, what has been said on the internet. And that's concerning to me. There is a certain thing as gentle parenting, and
I know exactly what you mean. Sometimes you're like, I can't believe you believe that. Like, it's very interesting what's happening right now in the world, and just seeing how many influences our children and grandchildren have that we didn't have.
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So, but things are changing. things are changing
Absolutely.
fast, very fast.
Absolutely.
So we just have to ride the wave.
Yep.
That's all I do. You and I have gotten to this point that we can say, okay, well, that's your circus. That's your monkey.
Exactly. Exactly.
So moving on to the other things that you and I have in common, and many other women, especially in midlife, are still learning to stop apologizing
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
how they show up. I mean, what helped you to become more comfortable in owning your voice as it is without feeling the need to, adjust it for others?
Wow. Well, I'm glad you asked because this is very hard for me. I catch myself doing this all the time. I think a lot of women, as you mentioned, are just incredibly aware of the people around them. I walk in a room and I am completely aware of everyone around me and the big picture. And I'm making stories up and creating things in my mind. It's just a constant. And if I step in front of someone, or I cut someone off, or maybe I switch subjects and it feels a little abrupt, I'm immediately like, I'm sorry, before I even need to do that. Right. But it goes deeper than that, because even if I'm speaking the truth to someone and I have a fear that their feelings might be hurt or they might feel uncomfortable, I'm inclined to soften it a little bit, or even prepare for an apology, right? But what I've noticed is that my male counterparts don't necessarily have that same reflex. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
So I learned this very early in my sales career. I was shadowing at the very beginning of my first sales job, and I'm sitting with my male colleague who's about to present a price quote to a customer. And before the meeting, I was prepared. I knew what that price quote was, and I was extremely uncomfortable with it because it was a very high number. It was fair. It was justified. It was not fluffed up at all, but it was significant. And I could feel my own anxiety rising. And I almost like I wanted to apologize or be prepared to apologize for it. But what I noticed is that my colleague did not flinch at all. He delivered that number just clearly, concisely, no apology, no hesitation. And even more, what I noticed is that the customer responded the same way. The customer wasn't shocked. They accepted it. The deal moved on. And what that taught me is that how we share information is how it's received by so many people. The way I deliver a message shapes how the person listening is going to receive that message. So for me, it is a matter of, there's not a switch, an on and off switch to be able to do it. It is a matter of being aware that I am that way. It is a matter of me taking a step back in conversation and being able to question myself, is it necessary to apologize right now? Is this, and just to be aware, it's something that maybe I will have to be aware of for the rest of my life. Who knows? But it is a matter of just being aware, being in that moment, and really just trying to not shrink, to show up. Absolutely. And not shrink.
I want to go back to something really powerful that you said, and that is how you share the information is how it's received.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes all the difference in the world in every situation.
Sure does.
It brought back to mind just relationships in general. It could be at home with your significant other or with your kids. If you come into that situation with, guns ablazing, then they're going to respond to you with guns ablazing, and you're going to think like, why are you yelling at me? And it's almost like, because you came at me that way and didn't even realize that that had happened. So then you get ready, then when all of that tension and nerves and are up there, then chances are you're less likely to stop, and apologize.
Yeah.
Or somebody brings it to your attention that, you were out of line. So, in any event, that was just how you deliver it, how you share that information definitely impacts how your message is received.
I remember two distinct times where I've delivered this message differently and had different results. I remember there was one time when one of my children was having a birthday, and we could not afford the gift that this kid wanted. And we were we were pinching pennies at the time. And I remember going to him and just being teary and like, I am so sorry. And I felt really bad about it. And as a result, guess how he felt? Really bad about it and teary. And I think he probably felt sorry for himself a little bit at the time too.
Yeah.
A different time, when we were pinching pennies and couldn't buy the gift another kid wanted, I bought a perfectly adequate gift, made a cake, had a nice little party, gave it to him. He was thrilled and later said, hey, I still want that thing. And I was like, hey, let's start saving money. And that was it. And it was just such a great example to me of like, delivery is so important.
That is absolutely right. Yeah. A lot of times we don't think we're setting the stage for these future incidents, but we actually are with just about everything that we do. I think about being in like a department store or a grocery store, and then in the next aisle, you hear a kid losing their brain. I mean, losing their mind because this is something, I want this, I want this. They're throwing a tantrum, throwing themselves on the floor. And that's not a situation where suddenly that kid got what they wanted, in that instance. There had been many instances prior to that where they used their loud voice and basically wore down whoever they were giving it to so they could get what they want. So it's a pattern that, just continues throughout their life. And then again, probably as an adult, they're going to be using that same voice.
Absolutely.
So just moving a little bit further into this discussion about this loudness. Now, as you've moved through the different seasons of your life, including now stepping into a new chapter, because you and I were in a chapter kind of together, and then I moved on to, I guess, this new chapter, and you moved on to a different chapter. What does it look like to define being heard on your own terms rather than meeting other people's expectations?
Sure. I am in the middle of this right now. And I do think this is something that impacts women in a very specific way, especially when we move through the different seasons of our lives. I kind of think about my life in the future, and I think maybe I'll be reinventing myself every couple of years. I don't know. A couple of years ago, I went through a very big reinvention after my divorce. And for the first time in my life, I bought a home of my very own. It was a huge moment. I felt like it was stability. I felt like it was an accomplishment, like I'd created this anchor for myself and also a home base for my kids. But now it's 2 years later and I am putting that house on the market. Wow. Yeah. And I'm not buying another one. I'm going to rent. And this decision has really forced me to be honest about the way I feel, but also to be very loud with people, if that's the word, about I'm doing this on my terms. I have to do this for me, because for most of my adult life, and I'm 52 years old, I've been focused on doing things the right way, the way that I think the expectations were. And but now I'm realizing that there's not one right way, that there's not a one size fits all way of living, right? There never has been. For me, this next chapter is about freedom. I need flexibility. I need to have an adventure. I want to travel. I want to have experiences. I want to be able to move if I choose to move. And I know that this choice will not make sense to everyone. And some people are probably going to question it. And that is why I have to define those terms, because I know my life, I know my priorities, and I know my timing better than anyone else. And I'm confident about that. And one of the biggest shifts for me has been realizing that I'm home base for my kids, not this house. It's me.
That's right.
Grounding doesn't come from a place, it comes from me. And I think that the stage of life is teaching me that being heard isn't about fitting into other people's expectations. It's about living in alignment with what matters to me. Even if it looks different than what matters to other people or what I pictured 2 years or 50 years ago. It's what matters and what's important to me.
That is so true. And a lot of times when we move to these different chapters, we're also moving to a different identity. And what worked with our last identity may not work at all for this new identity. And it's up to us, as you say, to define it and say, this is what works for me. There's no right or wrong. This is the way I feel, and this is the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
So as we move, and this time just went so fast, we are coming to the close of this, but
Sure.
someone who feels like they need to be louder to matter, whether at work or at home in relationships, what is one last piece of advice you want to give them?
Sure. Being louder does not make you more valuable. It makes you more noticeable, but it does not make you more valuable. Being consistent, being true to yourself, how you treat people, what words you use, that is really what presence is. And that's your legacy, and that's your reputation, and that's what's going to live on well after I sell this house, and who cares what car I was driving, right? It's all those other things. So because presence, not volume, is what people will remember.
Yes, that is just tremendous, Sonya. And I just want to thank you so much for agreeing to be on my show and just sharing all of your wisdom and your experience. And, you know, if today's session really reminds you of anything, let it be this. You don't have to be louder to be heard. You just have to trust that what you have to say is worth listening to. So for all of our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. And this has been Breaking the Silence, Finding the Courage to be Heard. And until next time, speak with intention, not volume. Until next time.
This podcast is brought to you by LifeWave. Ready to elevate your wellness game? Meet X39 from LifeWave.com. This game-changing patch uses phototherapy to stimulate your skin, enhancing strength and stamina by channeling your body's innate energy. Simply apply it to harness infrared heat, naturally boosting your vitality. Want to learn more? Visit www.lifewave.com/VernD and step into a healthier, more active lifestyle today. PR Connections Radio thanks you for watching this podcast. Check out more episodes of this show and our others at prconnectionsradio.com.